Good morning. It's Gregory Prato from Prato Capital. We've all know each other long enough to know that one of these exceptional times demand exceptional discussions. And today, many of you have already met a good friend, but more importantly, an amazing professional at Dimensional Fund Advisor is Apollo Lupescu. And I am thrilled to be able to have Apollo again talk about the broader markets. The title we really have given Apollo globally is the Director or Secretary of Explaining Things. So with that, I'd like to just say hi to Apollo. Good morning out there, Apollo, or good afternoon.
Hi, Greg. How are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, you as well, Apollo. And again, I know a lot of the folks have already had an introduction to you in the past. You've been here at Prato Capital. You've done webinars with us, which have just really been well received. And just to jump right into it, Apollo, a lot of the questions I'm getting more recently, now that the markets have sort of moved around in a more positive fashion, is they're just, people are guessing, is the market overvalued, and is it too high, is it too low? And a question I get asked, I'd love for you to make this jump into, is how are prices determined on a stock? I mean, how do we know if a market is valued too high or indeed too low? Is it undervalued? Maybe you could just give us a brief talk on that.
And I'm so glad you brought it up, because it is one of the most fundamental questions in investing, which is, where do these prices come from? What's behind the value of a company? And how do I know that I'm not overpaying? And how do I know that this is actually a good value for me to buy into? So to do it justice, Greg, if you allow me for a second, let me go back to the very first modern stock, the very first company that ever existed in the modern fashion. In fact, is the precursor of everything that we know. The modern society, the modern investment, the modern capitalist model that exists right now can be traced back to 1602. It's been for a very, very long time. And it's not surprisingly an American company. It happens to be the Dutch East India Company, which was based in Amsterdam. And what these folks did, they basically realized that as the Spaniards were they're the sailors, and they would go to the Indies and bring all the spices, then they would be the distributors. They realized that if we cut the middleman, if we send our own ships and they bring the merchandise, then they can make more money. The Dutch were incredibly entrepreneurial. And what happened was, is they sent some ships, and then some of the merchants put money into those ships. Some of them didn't come back. There was no GPS. There was no weather channel. You had pirates. You get lost. So these would lose their shirts. So what they did is they set the stage for the modern corporation. It was the very first and probably the largest multinational that ever existed. And what they did, which is so smart, they said that instead of just a few merchants putting money to build these ships, we need scale. And in order to get that scale, we need to bring in other people from society as part owner into this company. So what they did, as opposed to anything else that's done before, they said, we will open up ownership of this company to anybody in society who wants to participate. And they basically said that if you buy ownership into this company, you would be entitled to part of the profits that the company makes, and that would incentivize people to bring money in the company. That is exactly how modern stock ownership works. If you go buy stock into a company, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Goldman Sachs, you name it, you become part owner into that company. You own a piece of that company, and you are entitled to profits that the company will make for as long as the company exists. That was a premise set up in 1602 by the Dutch East India Company, and that is exactly how it works today. Now the question is, how much should you pay for that ownership? And that is the crux of the stock market, is how much should you pay to buy that piece of ownership into a company? And think about in 1602, the very first stock market in the world was formed in Amsterdam to trade that one single stock, the Dutch East India Company. But what it took for you to understand if you're paying too much or not paying enough is you have to have information. Information is the name of the game. If you have information that is better, that is faster, or you can analyze it better than others, then you give yourself a competitive edge. So the main idea of a stock is that you buy ownership into a company. You are entitled to receive profits for years and years and years to come. And the more information you have about what these profits might be, the more you get a sense of whether or not this is a good deal. The trouble is that, think about this, Greg, that what investors are trying to do is estimate what will the profits, what will the cash flows that I'll receive as an owner be for 1, 3, 5, 10, 20, 30. In fact, it could be a very, 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 very long-term horizon. So this is not just something that you receive for the next 6 months or 9 months. So the market's trying to estimate is what is the value of these profits that the company will make for all these years down the road. And it's incredibly difficult because, you know, right now the companies don't even have visibility 6 months ahead, let alone 6 years ahead or 60 years ahead. And these are very long-term propositions. So if you want to say whether a stock is overvalued or undervalued, you would somehow have to know what would these profits be for years and years and years down the road. And the reality is that right now, everybody has a guess, an estimate. And that's why what you have in the market is people that have, you know, very optimistic views about the future, and people have very pessimistic views about the future. And what the stock market's really trying to do is not come up to a consensus, but be a hopper, a machine where all these pieces of information, of expectation, gets put into a price, and that price that you see right now reflects these opinions that are coming not only from the pessimist but also from the optimist. So that's why it's incredibly hard to ever know if a stock is overvalued or undervalued, because it really reflects on payments that you'll get for so long that the near term doesn't have as much impact as you think. In fact, if you look at a value of any stock, 90% of the value of any stock would come from a year and beyond from now. So I mean that's the you know that's a pretty, like, when you look at the pure math of it, the vast majority of a company's value comes from a year and beyond, not necessarily over the next 6 to 12 months. So that's what makes it so hard, and that's why it's so important not to try to outguess the market and saying I know better, but rather look at this price as this beautiful mechanism that incorporates all these expectations, all these information, and it is probably the closest thing that we get to a fair deal, a fair price. And Greg, last thing is, we didn't have a chance to do it back in October when I was there, but there's an experiment that people have been doing forever, and I've done it so many times. We take a jar of jelly beans. You can do the Costco ones because I know how many there are in there. And you ask people to guess how many jelly beans are in the jar. And what you find invariably is that there's a range. And at the low end, I've seen about 500, and the high end, I've seen about 5,000. And when you average all of these entries, and the advisors do this, they tend to invariably be incredibly close to the actual number of jelly beans. And that's kind of how it works in the market. You have all these people with different opinions about this unknown number, but when you put it together, what you get is an estimate that's fairly close to the intrinsic value of a stock. So in that respect, I don't think that any stock is overvalued or undervalued. What you see in the price right now is a reflection of all these informations and expectations that both pessimists and optimists have about this very long-term future.